Peace and joy. Good evening to you all. I hope you've had a fruitful day. I don't say happy. I hope it has been a happy day. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Buddha, the blessed, noble, and fully self-awakened one. I have to be careful, I've got the microphone on. Okay, so we're moving on to a different discourse. This is the Wonder of Vehkanassa. It's a bit strange, this conversation, but try and make some head or tail of it. Anyway, he's a samana. He's somebody who's left the home life for the homeless life. And he approaches the Buddha after the usual greetings and all that and says, this is the perfect splendor. This is the perfect splendor. And the Buddha says, what do you mean? What do you actually mean by that? And he replies, Master Gautama, this splendor is the perfect splendor, which is unsurpassed by any other splendor higher or more sublime. And the Buddha says, well, what exactly is this splendor which is unsurpassed that you're talking about? And Kachana says, that splendor is the perfect splendor that is unsurpassed by any other splendor higher and more sublime. And the Buddha says, Kachana, you could carry on like this for a very long time. Now, there's a story now, a metaphor which the Buddha uses. It does occur in other discourses, so I don't quite know which discourse it actually arrives in first. See if I can find it. Oh, I've taken the Sutta 79, 110, 79. It's the Sutta before, actually. Too many suttas, that's the problem. Too many discourses. 10. Okay, so the Buddha then says, you can continue like this for a very long time. Venerable, that. So he says, it's like somebody who says, I am in love with the most beautiful woman in the country. And they would ask, good man, the most beautiful woman in the country, with whom are you in love? I don't know, he says, I don't know. He says, well, is it from this country or from another country? I don't know. What's her name, her clan? I don't know. Is she tall? Is she short? Is she middle height? I don't know. What village or town or city does she live there? I don't know. Then they would ask him, good man, do you then love a girl you've never known or seen? Yes. And he said, what do you think? That being so, would that man's talk amount to nonsense? So of course, he has to agree that, in fact, this would be nonsense. And then somehow, don't quite know where the connection is, but the Buddha either intuits or begins to understand that the problem here is that Vehkanassa, that's his name actually, Vehkanassa, really means the 5 sensual pleasures. That's the 5 physical bodily pleasures, not the mental ones. So then he gives the usual discussion about the teaching about that. Those things that are cognizable by the eye are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with sensual desire, or greed, or avarice, and so on and so forth. And that's the same for all the other 4 senses. These are the 5 chords of sensual pleasure. Now, pleasure and joy that arise dependent on this, on sensual pleasure, is called sensual pleasure. And sensual pleasure through the pleasures, but beyond sensual pleasure, there is a pleasure higher than sensual pleasure, and this is to be declared the highest among them. So the Buddha is saying here that, of course, there are pleasures and joys way above it. Now, the odd thing about this is that this man is a samana, so he's left the home life is normally described as that which is indulging in the five sense pleasures, and he's left to become a samana, a recluse, an ascetic. So it's difficult to know how he's satisfying it, except that it was fairly well known in those days, as unfortunately it is today, that anybody passing themselves off as a holy man or as a guru, it can sometimes get their way with women. And as you know, we've had some pretty bad cases in the Buddhist, in the total Buddhist community. So I presume that's what he's on about. So anyway, Vehkanassa sort of says, "Oh, well, that's really good teaching, you see." If for some reason he hadn't thought of that before. And then Kachana, the Buddha goes on, "For you who are of another view, who accept another teaching, who approve another teaching, who pursue a different training, who follow a different teacher, it is hard to know what sensuality is, or what sensual pleasure is, or what the pleasure higher than the sensual is. But those bhikkhus who are arahats," and then the usual description of an arahat, somebody who's destroyed the fetters of being, etc., they know what sensuality is, what sensual pleasure is, and what pleasure higher than the sensual is. Now, for some reason, this upsets Vehkanassa, because obviously the Buddha is saying you simply wouldn't understand. So I suppose it is understandable. So Vehkanassa is angry and displeased, and he reviled and disparaged and censured the Buddha, the Blessed One, saying, "The recluse Gautama will be worsted." So then the Blessed One says, "There are some recluses and Brahmins who, without knowing the past and without seeing the future, birth is destroyed." Then Vehkanassa says to the Buddha, "So there are some recluses and Brahmins here who, without knowing the past and without seeing the future, yet claim birth is destroyed, the holy life is lived, what had to be done has been done." So it's the usual description of someone who has gone beyond. What they say then turns out to be mere words, empty and hollow, according to you, the Blessed One. So the Buddha replies, "If any recluses or Brahmins, without knowing the past and without seeing the future, yet claim birth is destroyed, etc., etc., they can be proven wrong in accordance with the Dharma. Let the past be, Kachana, and let the future be. Let a wise man come who is honest, sincere, a man of rectitude. I will instruct him. I teach him the Dharma in such a way that by practicing as instructed, he will soon know and see for himself. This indeed there rightly comes to be liberation from the bond, that is, the bond of ignorance." Now, suppose, Kachana, there was a young, tender infant lying prone, bound in swaddling clothes. And later on, as a result of growth and maturing of his faculties, those swaddlings were loosened. And he would know, "I am free," and there would be no more bondage. So it is with the wise man. Now, Vehkanassa is really taken by this, and he says, "Magnificent, Master Gautama, magnificent. Those who have eyes to see, etc., etc. And from today, the Blessed One, remember me as a lay follower who's gone forth for refuge." So he comes in as a wanderer, and he leaves as a lay person. So he's obviously thought twice about the way he's living as a wanderer. Now, the question for me that arises when we talk about sensual pleasure is to ask ourselves: is it the actual sensual pleasure that we want? See, so when you're eating something, if it were just the sensual pleasure of eating, just the sheer taste, would that be enough? You see, so we have to eat. We have to eat at least once a day. I'm sure many people eat many more times. I also have breakfast. But the question is, when we eat something, or hear something, or see something which is beautiful, attractive, etc., would that simple sensual pleasure be enough, you see? Now, I would suggest that what comes with it is a mental state, and that mental state is variously described as happiness. Right? There's all levels and types of happiness, from a sense of comfort, a sense of joy, a sense of wonder, all those beautiful mental states that can be, we can describe them as happiness. So the question is, do we actually want the object of sensual pleasure, or do we want the sensual pleasure in order to create the inner mental state of happiness? You see? Now that's where the connection is. That's where the connection can go wrong, because then this happiness becomes dependent on what it is that the sensual pleasure is giving us, whatever the sensual pleasure is giving us. It becomes dependent. That dependency is what we call attachment. It's a dependency. It's like any drug, you see. So then our practice is to be constantly aware of that. You can't get rid of conditioning just because you want to get rid of it. You have to be aware of it. That, oh yeah, okay, this is greed, this is avarice, this is lust, this is the desire for power, whatever it is that turns you on, and to see that clearly, you see. And then of course you have to wait for that to pass, or at least not purposefully activate it. And then we go back and use the original sensual pleasure as just sensual pleasure. Now, when you use just sensual pleasure as sensual pleasure, the heart still responds, but the dependence is not there. See? So it's a case of learning how to let go, how to every time something comes to us that we are grasping onto, is to recognize the grasp and then just let it go. Just keep dropping it all the time. And that way, of course, you fulfill, I've quoted Blake before, but this lovely phrase from Blake, to kiss a joy as it flies is to live in eternity's sunrise. So I think that's something that we can take from this particular discourse. But it's a funny opening to it. He goes around saying this is the highest and most wonderful thing, but he can't tell the Buddha what it is. Anyway, by the end of it, of course, he's found his feet. And he goes, and it's interesting that he goes back to the household life. So just a little tale there. I hope you find it inspirational. I hope it drives you on towards full liberation from suffering sooner rather than later. So we can do some practice.